Welcome to what is today solely an online talk in our Autumn Invisible Histories series. We especially welcome our speaker, Uthra Rajgopal, who's got a fascinating take on Grunwick strike leader Jayaben Desai, whom she's described memorably as the sari-clad lion. Our talks are free, but we do of course welcome donations, and there's a donate button on our website. Okay, Uthra, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lynette, and a warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining this talk online today. And I'd like to thank all the colleagues and the team at the Working Class Movement Library who've been absolutely brilliant in supporting the research for this paper. So I'm going to share my screen now, so just bear with me. And hopefully you can all see this. I'm going to stop my video so that you get a clear view of the screen. And I'm also going to hide the panel, the control panel. So is that okay for everyone? Yeah. I can't see you now. So you'll just have to say yes.
Yes, that's absolutely fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynette. Thank you. Right. So my name, as Lynette said, is Uthra Rajgopal. I'm an independent curator and I have a specialist interest in South Asian textiles and dress. And this presentation is all about Jayaben Desai, whom I have titled the Sari-Clad Lion. So here we go. In 1976, 6 South Asian immigrant laboratory in Willesden in northwest London, demanding their right to join a union. Little did they know that this would ignite a historic 2-year dispute which brought together thousands of working class people in solidarity of their cause and would ultimately destabilise the British government. They were led by an Indian woman who became the leader and spokeswoman of the Grunwick strike, always seen wearing a brightly coloured sari worn in a distinctive drape, and her name was Jayaben Desai. Jayaben Desai was born in 1933 in Dharmaj in Gujarat, India. This state had and still has a long and sophisticated tradition of textile production, going back thousands of years, not only in spinning and handloom weaving of cotton and silk cloth for the national and international markets, but also in block printing, embroidery, and finished tailored garments. Gujarat was also the home to Mahatma Gandhi, whose dates were 1869 to 1948, the civil rights leader who finally led India to independence from British colonial rule. Cloth played a highly political role in this movement. Gandhi called for Swadeshi, the boycott of foreign goods, such as clothes, which had been manufactured in the Lancashire cotton mills, relying on the cotton grown by the farmers of India, exported at rock bottom prices and then sold as finished goods back to India at vastly inflated prices. To stop this exploitation of people, labour and land, Gandhi championed hand-spun and hand-woven cotton cloth, known as khadi. As a teenager, Jayaben Desai was aware of India's independence movement and remembered the imprisonment of Nehru and Gandhi by the British authorities. Jayaben also remembered listening to Gandhi's lectures on philosophy broadcast over the radio. And therefore it is my proposition that it is more likely than not that from an early age she was aware of the political message embedded in the power of cloth and the importance of the dressed body. In 1957, when she was 24 years of age, she married Suryakant Desai, who owned a business in Tanzania. After the wedding, Jayaben stayed on in India, giving birth to their first son and later completing a tailoring course. She then joined her husband in Tanzania, where they had her second child. Her sewing skills, so there's Tanzania, I've just marked it on the map. This is her journey. And this is her husband here. That's them as a young married couple, and that's them later in life. So her sewing skills when she arrived in Tanzania came in handy because it allowed her the opportunity to earn her own money, tutoring pupils from home. And in other words, and contrary to perhaps stereotypes that sometimes you may come across about South Asian women, her husband did not suppress her from working and going against the then dominant perception of South Asian women. It's fair to say the Desai family enjoyed the class privileges afforded to Asians settling in Africa at that time, occupying a middle ground between the white ruling classes and the black unskilled labour class. However, as the countries in East Africa gained independence from white colonial rule, there emerged a process of Africanization, contributing to a growing tension between the Asians and Africans. Tanganyika and Zanzibar got their independence to become Tanzania, and it, like many other East African countries, adopted policies to promote the African population. East African Asians who still held a British passport fled to the UK, which reached its zenith in 1972, with the compulsory expulsion by Idi Amin, ordering all Asians in Uganda holding a British passport to leave within 90 days, resulting in approximately 30,000 Ugandan Asians arriving in the UK, many of whom were Gujarati and Punjabi. In the late 1960s, Jayaben and their children arrived in London, a city and country swept up in a growing tide of racism and xenophobia. Both of these images that I'm showing you are from Race Today that are in the Working Class Movement Library archives. It's fair to say that at that time they had to live in very poor accommodation, sharing rooms amongst families. And despite being educated and coming from the urban middle class of East Africa, many migrants were desperate to take up any job wherever they could, often at much lower rates of pay and status than they had previously enjoyed. The Desai family, like countless other East African Asian migrants, effectively had to start their lives all over again. And these are just images again of some of the protests and the scenes that the Desai family and other families in their situation would have encountered on arrival in the UK. In 1974, Jayaben Desai took up a low-paid job in the mail order department at Grunwick at the site on Chapter Road in Willesden, North London. At this time, the mail order department was a vital component of the business, as many people would send their 35mm films by post to be processed there. The company was successful because of its rapid turnaround of film processing, its quality of work, and its cheap rates. As cameras became more widely available, the business rapidly expanded, and to cope with the summer rush, they frequently hired seasonal workers. By 1976, when the strike broke out, Grunwick employed half of its workforce in the mail order department at its premises in Chapter Road. It was in this department, the very heart of the business, that allowed the business as a whole to prosper. The staff in the mail order in 1976 were nearly all immigrants, mostly East Africans of Indian origin who were from the Gujarati community. Many were also women, and in the absence of a company uniform, many chose to wear a sari, often with a cardigan over it to keep the chill out. Working conditions were very, sorry, I just jumped ahead. Working conditions were very difficult. For example, members of the Asian female workforce had to ask permission to go to the toilet, and were threatened with dismissal if they failed to keep up with the very fast pace of the work. When the line manager compared her and her colleagues to chattering monkeys, Jayaben replied, "What you are running here is not a factory, it is a zoo. In a zoo, there are many types of animals. Some are monkeys that dance on your fingertips. Others are lions who can bite your head off. We are the lions, Mr. Manager." And with those defiant words, and after a culmination of a series of intimidating and racist incidents between the management and the workers, she led the workforce out on strike on the 20th of August, 1976. And if I just show you this slide, just to show the sari in its nivy drape, but we'll come back to that in a minute because I just want to talk a little bit more about the background of the strike. So the events that followed contributed immeasurably to increasing the level of respect shown to newly arrived South Asian immigrant workers, many of them, especially by their colleagues in the existing workforce, and they brought together an otherwise racially divided trades union. George Ward, who was the owner of the factory and himself an Anglo-Indian, played on the idea of Asian female shame, how being seen in such a public demonstration was not only demeaning to herself, but to her husband and entire family. However, according to Amrit Wilson, who knew Jayaben Desai, she recalled that in an interview with Mrs. Desai, and she states, George Ward would come to the picket line and try to mock us and insult us. One day he said, "Mrs. Desai, you can't win in a sari. I want to see you in a mini." Jayaben replied, "Mrs. Gandhi wears a sari and she is ruling a vast country." So I just now want to move on to talk about the importance of Jayaben Desai wearing a sari and the sari itself. So the Gujarati Hindu community, like many different communities from South Asia, have their own distinct culture, not only in their food, but also in their dress. And one of the most distinctive forms of dress was the way in which the sari was draped. Now, what I'm showing you is the most typical way that you see the sari being draped. And this is called or referred to as the nivy style. And so just to recap, the sari is a long, rectangular, highly versatile length of fabric. It's adopted by many women in South Asian societies. It's a multifaceted, multi-transitional, one-size-fits-all garment, which has been celebrated for thousands of years for its purity as a whole length of unstitched cloth. And normally, a sari can range in width. It can be anywhere from 45 to 52 inches wide, and it can be from as little as 4 yards up to 9 yards in length. The dimensions of the type of sari that one would purchase is really governed by the way in which you choose to drape it. So typically, as we see here in this picture, in the 60s and 70s, saris were worn in the 52-inch width of 6 yards. There are numerous ways in which a sari can be draped, and each signifies the wearer's socio-cultural identity, including their community or region. And this is just to show you how complex and easy it is to drape a sari. It's just reiterating that idea of it being one long flat length of cloth that's wrapped and draped around the body. And you'll see that underneath the sari is a long type of underskirt, which we tend to call a petticoat. And this is a blouse or a choli, and it tends to be tailor-made to your specific body measurements. So this particular style that you see here as Jayaben Desai is wearing is known as the Sida Palla Gujarati style of draping. And it involves bringing the pallu, or the palla as it's written in some books, which tends to be the usually the most decorated part of the sari, the end part of the sari that is draped over the shoulder. And that section is brought over the front of the right shoulder. And instead of being draped across the left shoulder that I had shown you previously in the commonly seen Nivi style, this was very much associated with the Gujarati way of dressing. And due to this way of draping, this Gujarati style can be easily identified from both the front, as you see here, and the back, okay? So in addition, the pleats that fall from the waistline to the feet usually face to the left in the Nivi style, but face to the right in this Sida Pallu Gujarati style. So, and I've just put on a link here to a YouTube clip if you want to know more about draping the sari in that particular way. Furthermore, it's my proposition that this style of draping was worn by the urban middle-class mercantile communities in Gujarat. From the available archival images of Jayaben Desai taken in public on the picket line and in her own home, there appears to be a consistency in the way she presented her dressed body. And there is a historian, a sociologist who is referred to in fashion theory. His name is Merleau-Ponty, and he writes in his theory of the experience of dress as being a subjective act of attending to one's body, making the body an object of consciousness and as an act of attention with the body. So it is clear from the available evidence that we have that Jayaben Desai consciously chose to drape her sari in this distinctive Gujarati style. And by taking this action through her dressed body, she was signifying her regional, cultural, and class status. Her enclothed body positioned her as a middle-class Gujarati wife, connecting her back to her country of birth and thereby India's long and historic association with the political power of cloth. As the scholars Anita and Pearson have stated, Jayaben and other strikers visited the homes of women workers to address any concerns they might have had about taking part in the strike and to persuade their families to allow them to join. But Jayaben recalled that many young women's parents remained worried about the shame that participating in such a public protest might bring on the families, risking gossip and disgrace for defying the gendered norms within their community by taking action which put them in the public eye. But I propose that Jayaben Desai dressed in this specific Gujarati style of draping the sari to break down those barriers within the Asian community, allowing her access into their homes to sit and speak with them, as she was seen as someone who was respectable and more traditional perhaps, and because of the way she dressed, these were clearly messages that people within the Gujarati community and within the South Asian community would have readily understood. And once we train our eye to recognize this style of drape, which essentially acts as a cultural and class signifier, as I've stated, we can also observe a sense of uniformity amongst younger women who were at the forefront of the strike. And so here you have Jayaben Desai on the picket line. And just to reiterate, this was something that was taken as a very defiant and brave step. it certainly wasn't something that, as I've said, other middle-class families would have rushed in to support her, but she generated that support and she cultivated that support. And my argument is that she cultivated that support through her dress. So if we look at these images, which again can be found at the archives at the Working Class Movement Library, force of habit to say museum. You can come across magazines such as Spare Rib, and you can see all of these women who joined her out on the picket line. And you can see that the different styles of the draping as well that comes through in some of these photos. Obviously, England is cold, even in summer, perhaps so. A lot of the pictures do show the women covered up in cozy knits and coats and so on. And this is just a picture of Jayaben Desai in her home. You can just make out there that the pallu has been brought to the front, but and you can make out the direction of the pleats as well. And so when we look at other images of women, Gujarati women who were involved with the strike, this particular image in the center is very, very striking, because you definitely see through this image this sense of pride in the way that they're dressing, and also this sense of uniformity in the way that they are draping their sari. And it's my proposition in this presentation that it's no coincidence that they're all dressed and draping their sari in this way. It's a deliberate, conscious act aimed at presenting a dignified and unified front, using their dressed bodies as a powerful mediator, conveying the message of their gender, status, and regional identity. And so Jayaben Desai's method of draping the sari in this particular style played a pivotal role in two ways. Firstly, it was a signifier to other Gujarati women within the South Asian immigrant community, providing a sartorial call to arms to stand together as a unified whole, and thus encouraging them to join ranks and support the strike. And secondly, it silently and ruthlessly undermined the white patriarchy management. I propose that they wrongly believed that South Asian female immigrants, particularly those who were seen in traditional clothing, were branded as docile or subservient and under the mercy of their husband's control. They believed these women provided cheap labor, were ready to work in the jobs that white people did not want, and were thus easily exploitable. How wrong they were. And in fact, because Jayaben Desai, like other South Asian female workers, were allowed to wear their own clothes and not expected to wear a company uniform, the sari acted as a shield and a sword, or to put it another way, a dual image, as a perceived sheep and an actual lion. So just by way of conclusion, as I know time is running on. So just to conclude, whilst there has been much scholarship on the workers' rights of South Asian immigrants, highlighting issues of trade unions, gender and labour, there has been little attention on the dress of Jayaben Desai. In all the available images, the remarkable sight of this lady dressed in a sari, standing in front of hundreds of supporters and fearless in the face of the wall of towering policemen, is an enduring and powerful image. Not least because at this time, immigrants coming to Britain, like me and my family, were faced with the rise of the National Front and escalating confrontational, often violent racism, with constant taunts from people telling us to go back to our own country. Yet Jayaben Desai never once compromised her sense of dress by adopting the Western fashions, and even more remarkably, her visible presence striding forth in a sari with a loudspeaker, brought the mainly white male trade unionists together, joining her in supporting her campaign for union recognition. And despite eventually losing the Grunwick strike, Jayaben told at the final meeting of the strikers that they could be proud. And she said, "We have shown that workers like us, new to these shores, will never accept being treated without dignity or respect." Not long before she died in 2010, Jayaben Desai said, "I am proud of what I did. They wanted to break us down, but we did not break." The events of 1976 to 78 are still remembered as an important moment, not just in local history, but in the fight for equal rights for women and ethnic minorities. They brought people of different races and backgrounds together in support of the rights of migrant women workers, shattered stereotypes about South Asian women in Britain, and changed the face of trade unionism. And her life story and the Grunwick strike was actually made into a play called "We Are the Lions, Mr. Manager." And I was fortunate enough to go and watch that play when it was performed in one of the trades union buildings in Manchester. And it was a really, really moving and powerful performance. And this actress here played the role of Jayaben Desai, and you can see here in the way that she's dressed, she's deliberately draped her sari in that very notable Gujarati style. So finally, I just want to say thank you again to everyone who's joined online today. And thank you for listening. But also I would like to thank all those South Asian women who fearlessly stood on the picket lines to campaign for people like me and my family and thousands of other people who arrived in the UK in the 60s and 70s and after, the right to join a union and for better treatment in the workplace. While there are still inequalities in the workplace that exist at all levels of employment, I am personally extremely grateful for the sacrifices and hardships they endured, and their work will always continue to inspire me.
Thank you so much. That's absolutely fascinating. I love the idea of a sartorial call to arms. That really is yeah, it's quite something. We were lucky enough to have the play that you referred to as well. The Townsend Productions play did come and had 2 sellout nights at the Working Class Movement Library, and it was a terrific play. Also, strangely enough, the phrase "We Are the Lions, Mr. Manager" is the subject of a very large flag at fan-owned football club FC United of Manchester. So there are many links that can be made. No, that's excellent. We've got one question already, along with lots of what a wonderful talk type comments, which is terrific.
It's been a long-standing ambition of mine to write this paper and to talk about the way Jayaben Desai was dressed, because I feel there's so much to say about that history. So I'm really grateful for everyone who supported in this research, and I would encourage other people who are interested in South Asian dress to take up this area of research as well, because it's absolutely fascinating.
Absolutely. Anna says, you made a great reference to Merleau-Ponty. Where can I find this? Which work?
Right, let me just get my notes, hang on. So I tend to refer to a book by Joanne Entwistle, and it's called The Fashioned Body, Fashion, Dress and Modern Social Theory, and it was published in 2000 by Polity Press. And Merleau-Ponty is quoted by Entwistle in that book. So if you have a look at Entwistle's book called The Fashioned Body, you'll have an insight into Merleau-Ponty, but also a great number of other philosophers sociologists who were writing about dress and the significance of that.
Thanks. Nicola's saying she couldn't write her notes fast enough. My colleague Lindsay says, don't forget, this is going up on YouTube afterwards. So yes, please encourage other people to watch then, and you can go back and revisit it. Nicola asks if you can talk more about choice of colour of the sari was significant, also the pattern.
Yes, well, that's a really interesting point, and my response is limited to what I've seen in photographs. I would love it if some of her family members came forward and said, here is her wardrobe, we will donate it to a museum or collection, because actually studying the physical sari would tell us a lot more. It's fair to say that in the 60s and 70s, there was a bit of a craze for brightly coloured machine printed synthetic saris, and certainly the urban middle class were very keen to keep up with these fashions. And just when I'm sorry, just hang on a minute, that I just have to break off. I'll be back in a second.
Okay, well, that's while that's happening, I'll just let people know that we do have a fantastic collection of material relating to the Grunwick strike. Adrian asked how come we had it. As often with the library, we're not entirely sure where things came from. There was a time before a previous time when acquisitions weren't noted necessarily. We think it may have come from a trade union, Adrian, but it certainly is. There's 12 boxes of archived material, some of which was on closed access, and that my colleague Jane has now catalogued it all, so you will find it all listed on our catalogue, along with we've got 10 minutes of amateur footage of film and a lot of books, and then as Uthra says, it's also journals like Race Today, etc. Yes, sorry, but back to you.
The buzzing has restarted, the drilling has restarted, so I apologize. Anyway, so yeah, so it would have been a synthetic machine printed brightly colored sari that would have been fashionable, and those probably would have been the saris she would have purchased or brought with her from Gujarat to Tanzania and then to the UK. Having said that, there were sari shops that were popping up in densely populated areas of South Asian communities, but a lot of people, if they had an opportunity to go back home to India, they tend to buy their saris and have their blouses tailor-made there. And in fact, that still happens today because you get a better choice.
Sonnet says, what is your view of what Jayaben Desai herself thought regarding the role of clothes in the public realm?
What is my what, sorry?
Your view of what Jayaben Desai herself thought regarding the role of clothes in the public realm.
So I think because she's from Gujarat, which was the home and birthplace of Gandhi, and because she grew up as a teenager very much aware of the political protests and the independence movement, and knowing that Gandhi was seen publicly dressed in a very specific and to some degree calculated way, the impact of the way she dressed and that sense of pride and that identity, I think has certainly been evident in all the photographs I've seen of her. Obviously, I've not had an opportunity to interview her when she was alive, so I can only go on records and interviews that I've read, but certainly I think she would have been aware of that deep sense of pride, and also that aspect of how we wear and what we wear, conveying a certain identity and culture.
There's a question here which is a broader one, and so it might be we can open it up if anybody else in the audience wants to respond as well. How were protests, especially held by non-native people in Britain, accepted during that time? Did they allow for it and ensure the safety of the protesters?
I think it's fair to say that Jayaben Desai was very good at rallying women South Asian migrant workers. However, there were young men who also joined in the protests and the pickets. It wasn't necessarily seen as something that people would rush to do, because there was an issue of safety, and as I've said before, this idea of shame or being seen as an South Asian woman in public, perhaps had some sort of take up in some families. But because of the time she was born in, and because she came from a time when India was moving, into independence and fighting to be independent, she was used to that level of protest, and she was aware of that. So she never had that sense of hesitation. She was defiant, and because of her defiance and her strength and her determination, other people took strength from that. So I think it's a bit to do with the time that she was born in, and the fact that she migrated twice, once to Tanzania and then from Tanzania into England. So she just felt that she had a right to be treated equally like everybody else, and I think she took a great lot from the spirit of Gandhi's movement.
Thank you. I'll just sort of open that up. If anybody wants to, I can see Ellen has raised your hand. Did you want to talk about 70s protests more generally and the policing of them, Eleanor? Was that what you wanted to contribute? Hold on, you need to unmute yourself.
Right. No, but I can remember the dispute very well, because we had a huge delegation of people from Essex go on a march, go to actually demonstrate in their favour, for the women strikers. And the one thing there was a huge amount going on. One of the things I remember, though, much to my shame, was that I then discovered, I looked along and I saw that one of my husband's buses was being used to bring not the reef in, but actually being used by the company. So I immediately got onto him and said, what's going on? And he had apparently lent it to somebody, not knowing that that was what it was going to be used to. So I've always felt highly guilty and remembering that, but there were a huge amount of support in the demo I went on.
Yeah. It just grew, didn't it? It grew, yes. And it was in so many of the papers and the headlines for such a long time, which is why the Working Class Movement Library have such fantastic archives, because they've kept those newspaper cuttings.
Yes, Jill says she can remember her dad getting up early in the morning to go on the Grunwick picket line. He was full of admiration for the Asian women at Grunwick. This dispute will always be remembered, and the images of the women in their saris.
Thank you.
Elaine, are you do you want to unmute yourself?
Please. Yeah, hello. Yes, so I missed the previous speaker, some of it, because somebody knocked at the door. But John, my husband, was saying the last speaker was on a coach from Essex at the time, came on as coach.
What she said was that her husband's bus company had provided accidentally a woman move a bus for the other side, which was slightly embarrassing. So yeah, but she did come from Essex. Yes, yeah.
I was a student at Essex University, and I went once to Grunwick, and there were regular coaches. There was just ongoing support, and it was, yeah, tremendous. And it did build and build and build. And earlier you showed a photo of the NUM, the miners, who I think would regularly, yes, they had a one-day strike. So it was incredible, the support there. You know, it was very yeah, it was really alive when you went there. But I speak from going, you know, on the one occasion. But I think my husband wants to talk as well.
Yes, just to add that it was an amazing period in Labour history, and certainly the workers at Grunwick were not unique in the sense of representing ethnic minorities in struggle. I was involved in support groups for Grunwick in Birmingham, and I can also remember around that time disputes at the Imperial Typewriter Works, and also several years in which predominantly Asian workers in the Bakers Union were in dispute for improved conditions. So whilst the Grunwick dispute is rightly celebrated, it is far from unique in the history of the participation of ethnic minorities in working class struggle in Britain.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think, you know, there was definitely, I think, a domino effect, because I think once a group such as the workers at Grunwick were seen and became so visible, I'd like to think it gave strength to other people, such as the typewriters and the bakers, who have also been documented, and you can find examples of South Asian women on the picket line protesting again in the archives at the library. So yes, you're absolutely right. It was part of a wider movement at that time, but the reason why I've specifically chosen to talk about Grunwick for this presentation was because I wanted to talk about the importance of the sari and how it was draped, and the significance of that to the Gujarati community, who were a very big community coming over at that time.
And that has been absolutely fascinating. You've got lots of positive messages in the chat, which I will forward to you, because people have been, yeah, like me, sort of thought, what a fascinating history. Anna wants to know if you've published anything about it.
The paper will be published through Birmingham University, because I first gave this talk at a dress conference in May that was run by Birmingham City University. So yeah, the proceedings of that, the paper it's been submitted, so hopefully it should be published soon. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, let us know when it is, and we'll spread the word. Yeah.
Thank you.
Does anybody else want to add to this? If anyone wants to wave to me, anything they want to say? Or are we reaching a happy conclusion, knowing that we are sort of much better informed about a subject which we didn't possibly even know was there to be looked at? It is just a fascinating take on our material. It's been a real treat.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone. Thank you for all your comments. I'm sorry I haven't been able to individually reply to you all. I'm not that quick on Zoom, I'm afraid, with the chat and everything. But very happy to know that friends and colleagues are in the audience as well. So thank you.
I think we've covered all the questions, and I will certainly pass the messages on to you, because people have so appreciated it. So right, okay, thank you for getting some virtual applause and some thumbs up, and it's been a very interesting chat. So thanks to everybody for participating. Thanks obviously particularly to Uthra. It's been great. So if you want to recommend this to others, if you joined late, the talk has been recorded and we'll be uploading it to the library's YouTube channel along with the rest of our talks, and there'll be a link on the event web page. So next week's talk is again online only. So on Wednesday, the 6th of October at 2 p.m. Frank Palmieri will be getting up heroically early in Miami to talk to us, and his title is Thomas Spence, Satirist, Utopian Socialist. We do cover a wide range of topics here at the library. So until next Wednesday, best wishes to you all in solidarity from all here at the Working Class Movement Library. Goodbye.